Welcome to this deep dive, and we're going to be taking a look at phosphate today.
Phosphate.
Yeah, pretty important element
Yeah,
when it comes to feeding the world.
absolutely.
And we're going to be looking specifically at Morocco's role
Okay.
in the industry, and more specifically,
Yeah.
the company that dominates it,
Yeah.
OCP Group.
Sounds good. Yeah.
So get ready to learn a little bit about how they've become such a global player,
Mm-hmm.
their sustainability efforts, and maybe even a little bit about some of the controversies
Yeah.
that surround their practices.
Interesting.
So maybe a good place to start is just like the sheer scale
Right.
of Morocco's phosphate reserves.
Yeah. So right off the bat, the thing that really strikes me is that Morocco holds over 70%
Wow.
of the world's known phosphate reserves.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a huge amount.
Yeah.
And, that gives them incredible leverage
Yeah.
in the global fertilizer market,
Mm-hmm.
which is, I guess, essentially what makes phosphate so vital. I mean, without
Right.
crop yields would plummet,
Yeah.
and it would be a real struggle to feed
Yeah.
the world's population.
Yeah. It's almost like sitting on a gold mine, but
Yeah.
for food production.
Exactly.
And of course, that like directly translates
Mhm.
to OCP Group's economic influence. We're talking 15 to 20% of Morocco's
Wow.
total exports,
Huge.
a significant chunk of their GDP,
Yeah.
thousands of jobs. It's
Yeah.
it's hard to overstate their impact.
It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting because OCP
Right.
hasn't, it hasn't always been smooth sailing for them.
Okay.
They went through a pretty major transformation, especially after Mostafa Terrab took over as CEO
Okay.
in 2006. And he kind of spearheaded some
Mhm.
pretty radical changes, like pushing for privatization
Okay.
and autonomy.
Yeah.
So this essentially gave OCP the freedom
Yeah.
to operate more like an independent business.
Yeah.
Making strategic decisions without being heavily controlled
Yeah.
by the government.
So they basically went from like a state-run operation to a more
Exactly.
global player.
Yeah, much more agile.
And I'm curious, like,
Yeah.
what kind of impact did that have on their approach
Yeah.
to the industry?
Well, for one, it allowed them to invest
Yeah.
heavily in modernization and expansion.
Okay.
They poured over $20 billion into new processing plants,
Wow.
improving their logistics and really ramping up their research and development.
Okay.
So this was a clear signal that they weren't content with just being
Yeah.
a phosphate extractor.
Right.
They wanted to be at the forefront of innovation in the fertilizer industry.
Yeah, it seems like a big part of that innovation was embracing technology.
Right.
Right. They've been pretty vocal about their use of automation,
Mm-hmm.
AI, even things like blockchain. It's
Exactly.
it's a far cry from the image of like a
Yeah.
traditional
Absolutely.
mining company.
It is. And this tech-driven approach has allowed them to do some pretty interesting things.
Okay.
For example, they're using AI to manage their resources more efficiently.
Interesting.
You can almost think of it like a smart home thermostat.
Okay.
But for a mining operation,
Yeah.
it helps them to kind of optimize extraction,
Yeah.
predict potential issues, and make the whole process more sustainable.
Speaking of sustainability, that seems to be another major focus for OCP.
It is.
They've talked about their commitment to green energy,
Mm-hmm.
eco-friendly fertilizers, but how does this actually play out
Right.
in their operations?
So one example is their investment in green ammonia.
Okay.
This is a way to produce ammonia,
Yeah.
which is a key ingredient in fertilizer,
Mhm.
but using renewable energy sources
Okay.
instead of fossil fuels.
Gotcha.
So it's a significant step towards reducing their carbon footprint.
Mm-hmm.
They've also set a very ambitious goal
Okay.
to run entirely on renewable energy by 2030. And they're investing heavily in solar and wind power to achieve that.
So they're not just paying lip service to sustainability. They're making
They're putting their money where their mouth is.
concrete investments.
Yeah.
But it's one thing to be sustainable at home. How are they approaching their global operations?
Right.
Especially in a continent like Africa,
Yeah.
where the need for fertilizer is so immense.
So that's where OCP Africa comes in.
Okay.
This initiative is essentially their dedicated effort
Yeah.
to help boost agricultural productivity
Okay.
across the continent.
Mm-hmm.
They're investing billions in building local fertilizer production facilities,
Okay.
conducting soil research to tailor fertilizers to specific regions,
Gotcha.
and even providing agricultural training programs to farmers.
Interesting.
So it's a very hands-on approach.
Mm-hmm.
which has garnered both praise and scrutiny.
Interesting. It sounds like they're trying to position themselves not just as like a fertilizer supplier, but as like a partner in helping Africa achieve agricultural self-sufficiency.
Exactly.
But as you mentioned, there's probably some complexities and maybe even some controversies surrounding that approach.
There are indeed. Some critics argue that their motives are driven more by profit than altruism. Others point out that the heavy reliance on fertilizers, even if they're more environmentally friendly, can still have negative impacts on soil health in the long run. So it's a delicate balance between boosting agricultural output and ensuring sustainability.
Yeah. It sounds like there's definitely two sides to this story.
Yeah, there are.
And I'm curious to delve deeper into both the opportunities and the challenges that come with OCP's global ambitions.
Yeah, me too.
So let's jump into that.
Sounds good. Yeah. It's a complex situation for sure, and navigating that global landscape definitely comes with its own set of hurdles. I think one of the biggest challenges for OCP, and really any company that deals with commodities, is market volatility. You know, the price of phosphate can fluctuate significantly, and that directly impacts their bottom line.
So even though they have this like massive control over supply, they're still kind of at the mercy.
They are,
of market forces. And I imagine that gets even more complicated when you factor in geopolitical risks. We're talking about a company that operates in multiple continents, each with its own political and economic
trade tensions, political instability, changes in government regulations can all disrupt their operations. Think about their dealings with India, for instance. One of their biggest markets. The Indian government has its own agenda when it comes to fertilizer subsidies, import policies, and all of that can create a lot of uncertainty for OCP.
It's like playing a high-stakes game of chess, constantly trying to like...
constantly trying to anticipate.
And adapt to these global shifts. And then on top of all of that, they're dealing with these growing concerns about the environmental impact.
The big one.
Of phosphate mining and fertilizer use. There's a whole debate.
Huge debate.
Around whether these practices are ultimately sustainable for the planet.
That's a debate that OCP can't afford to ignore. There's increasing pressure from environmental groups and even some consumers to reduce our reliance on phosphate-based fertilizers. They're often linked to water pollution, and the production process itself can be very energy intensive, contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a tough spot to be in, essential for food production. But with some potential environmental downsides.
And it's not like they have a monopoly on the market.
No, they don't.
Either they're facing competition from other major phosphate producers.
Like China, the U.S., Russia.
So they're not just dealing with these like external pressures. They have to stay ahead of the curve in terms of...
Exactly. They can't just rest on their laurels.
Innovation and efficiency.
So how are they responding to all of these challenges? Well, from what I've observed, they're doubling down on their technology investments. So they're using AI not just for resource management, but also to develop customized fertilizers that are tailored to specific soil conditions. And crops. So this kind of minimizes waste, reduces the amount of fertilizer needed. And ultimately lessens the environmental impact.
So it's almost like precision agriculture. On a massive scale. And I've also read about their use of blockchain technology. Can you explain how that fits into the picture?
So they're exploring blockchain for supply chain transparency and traceability. So this allows them to track their products from the mine to the farm, ensuring quality control and potentially reducing the risk of fraud or counterfeiting. It's a way to build trust with consumers and regulators, showing that they're committed to ethical and sustainable practices.
It's interesting how they're using all of this like cutting edge technology to address some of these like...
Age-old challenges?
Age-old challenges in the agricultural industry. But it also seems like they're taking a more holistic approach, especially with their focus on Africa.
OCP Africa is a big part of their strategy. And it goes beyond just building factories and selling fertilizer. They're investing in soil testing and analysis, working directly with farmers to educate them on best practices. And even partnering with local communities to develop sustainable farming methods.
It sounds like a genuinely collaborative effort and potentially a more sustainable model.
Yeah, it could be.
For agricultural development in the long run. But of course, any large-scale initiative like this is going to face scrutiny.
There are definitely valid questions being raised. Some critics argue that this could create a dependency on OCP's products and technology, potentially hindering the development of local indigenous solutions. Others point out the risk of land grabbing or exploitation, especially if these partnerships aren't managed carefully and transparently.
It's a reminder that even with the best of intentions, there can be unintended consequences.
Absolutely.
And it highlights the importance of that ongoing dialogue, critical evaluation, and ensuring that all stakeholders, especially local communities, have a voice at the table.
It's crucial.
It seems like there's a lot riding on OCP's shoulders, not just for like Morocco's economy, but for global food security and the future of sustainable agriculture.
Absolutely. They're in a very powerful position. And it's up to them to use that power responsibly. They've set some pretty ambitious goals, like becoming carbon neutral by 2040.
Wow.
So if they can achieve that, while genuinely contributing to sustainable development, especially in regions like Africa, it could be a real game changer for the industry.
It really feels like we're at this like crossroads when it comes to feeding the world. Like, we need to increase food production to meet the needs of a growing population, but we also have to do it in a way that doesn't destroy the planet.
It is.
It's a tall order.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us back to the question of like what role companies like OCP will play in shaping the future of food. You know, they're clearly trying to position themselves as part of the solution. But it's still an open question whether their approach is truly sustainable in the long term.
That's something I've been thinking about a lot throughout this whole deep dive. On one hand, they're investing in these like really impressive technologies and initiatives, especially when it comes to renewable energy and like supporting farmers in Africa. But on the other hand, there are those lingering concerns about, you know, the environmental impact of phosphate mining and the potential for unintended consequences with their global expansion.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers. And it's not just up to OCP to figure it out. Consumers have a role to play in demanding more sustainable practices. Governments need to create policies that incentivize responsible agriculture. And researchers need to continue exploring alternative approaches to fertilizer production.
Yeah, it sounds like we need this like multi-pronged approach.
We do.
With collaboration from all sides. There's no
silver bullet
solution. But perhaps OCP's journey can offer some valuable lessons.
I think so. I think their willingness to embrace technology and innovation, particularly in the realm of sustainability, is encouraging. And their focus on building partnerships, especially in Africa, could potentially serve as a model for other companies looking to make a positive impact.
What stands out to you as like their most significant contribution so far?
Well, I think their investment in green ammonia production is a really big deal. If they can successfully scale up that technology and make it economically viable, it could significantly reduce the carbon footprint of the fertilizer industry. That would be a major win for the environment.
And perhaps a step towards decoupling food production.
Absolutely.
From fossil fuels, which feels absolutely crucial in this fight against climate change.
It is,
It's been really fascinating to kind of explore all these different facets of OCP Group. We've covered a lot of ground from their like dominant position in the phosphate market to their ambitious sustainability goals and the complexities of their global operations.
It's a company that's constantly evolving and adapting to a changing world. And their story is far from over.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought. We've talked a lot about OCP's responsibility to act sustainably and ethically. But what about our own responsibility as individuals? What choices can we make in our daily lives to support a more sustainable food system?
That's a great question to reflect on. Whether it's reducing food waste, choosing locally sourced produce, or supporting companies that align with our values, every small step we take can make a difference.
Yeah.
The future of food is in our hands.
Yeah.
Both collectively and individually.
Well said. Well, thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the world of OCP Group.
It's been a pleasure.
I hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Yeah. Me too.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those important questions.